Okay, we'll just give people a chance to file in. Great. Thank you for joining us, and sorry to keep you waiting. Welcome to Lowenstein Sandler's VentureCrush. Today we're going to talk to Ryan Neese from Next Play and Teresa Gao from A Crew. And as always, we have a deep desire to ensure that you folks connect with one another. So there'll be some stuff going on in the chat, but we really encourage you to drop your LinkedIn links, tell us who you are and where you're from. People do connect that way at these events. And we also want your questions, and we will try to answer them as we're going along. There will be a discussion of background info, biographical info, so that it's not just a discussion about the venture markets. And I also want to mention, as you probably already see in the chat, we have some info there about a couple things, and I'll break in later to talk about them. So with that, let's jump right in and ask Ryan a question about background. Ryan, you gave an interview in 2016. I don't expect you to have memorized it. In the interview, you said, "You never know when that window is going to close. In the back of my mind, I always thought of myself as being on thin ice." Do you still feel like the ice underneath you is thin? And how has it helped you to think of yourself as being on thin ice?
Yeah, Ed, well, one, thank you for allowing me to join you, and I really appreciate all the work that you've done for the ecosystem. You've been a champion for diversity and inclusion. You've been a champion for emerging managers. You've been a champion for others, and you and Betsy, your wife, have done so much. And I just, I'm grateful that I could be here with you today and be a supporter and a fan and sit here and be peppered with a few questions, but just really appreciate your work. And you do it with genuineness and authenticity, and I really respect that. And to be here with Teresa and her background, it's an honor. So I'm just grateful for that opportunity. When I think about that question, I slightly remember the interview. I don't remember verbatim, but I believe I was answering a question really as it pertained to playing in the NFL and really feeling like you're on thin ice. And the reason that you feel like you're on thin ice, and whether you're a rookie or you're a 20-year veteran, which there aren't that many, but either way, the day that you become a starter is the day that they're trying to find your replacement. Right? They're trying to find a younger, cheaper version of you the day that you become the starter. And I mean, that's the job, that's the way the model works. And so depending on your skill set and depending on your contribution to the team, and depending on how successful you are, you're kind of on thin ice all the time. And I was like a guy that was on the bubble. I was fortunate to be a starter. I was fortunate to be a captain. I was fortunate to be an NFL representative or union representative for the team, and was considered a leader in the locker room. But nonetheless, and a lot of people don't know this, every Tuesday in the NFL, most teams are bringing players off the streets to try out, to work them out, to test them, to see what's going on. And so, for example, I was a linebacker, and you might have had a bad game on Sunday, and you roll into the office on Tuesday, and there's 15 linebackers working out. There's a reason why those 15 linebackers are working out, right? There's some signaling that's going on there. And so there's a level of pressure, a level of accountability to self and to team. And so you feel like you're a little bit on thin ice. And so, and then you realize that the statistics, despite there being only 25,000 men that have ever played in the NFL, right? That's in the history of the NFL, that's not a large number when you really think about it. Even amongst that population, the average lifespan of an NFL player is only 3 years and 3 games. So it's not a very long career. And so you understand that. And I grew up around it. So I was maybe a little bit more familiar with the odds and the statistics and the challenges and the understanding of what feeling like thin ice felt like. And then fast forward to where we are today. I'm actually grateful that I was in that environment, when an environment where you have alphas, where you have elites, you have men and women and individuals that are pursuing excellence on a daily basis, that are exhausting themselves, and thrive in that kind of chaos and pressure environment. Because in this industry that we're in now, or that I'm in now, it's very similar. And I would say oftentimes I use sports analogies to try to describe what I'm going through, or what we're looking at, or what the environment is. And oftentimes, as an outsider, as an athlete, as a minority, as an emerging manager, blah, 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 you name the things, the boxes that could be checked that make you feel like an imposter. You feel like you're on thin ice, and you carry a level of pressure. I know I carry a level of pressure on myself to perform, to not be a statistic, to not be fall into a box of the dumb jock, or to fall into the box of oh, somebody, oh, he's the athlete, somebody else is running the shop. There's a lot of things that I think about on a daily basis that make me feel like I'm on thin ice every day. And it drives me, right? I'm used to it. I've been in that environment. And so it's a great question. It's fueled me in many ways to push me to succeed and make sure I don't fall in.
I love that answer. I'm going to ask you one more question, then hop over to Teresa with a little bit about her earliest background. You mentioned exhausting yourself, and you've given, there's other press on you that uses that word and that focuses on exhausting the moment. And in one of the articles on you, it talks about, exhausting the moment was a theme your dad has lived by. And you then pose the question, remember the last time you felt really exhausted. Now imagine doing that every day. How do you think about exhausting yourself and the pursuit of excellence?
Yeah, even when you say that, I know for myself, I take a deep breath, in preparation to like, oh man, that's exhaust yourself, to exert yourself to the brink of quitting, is really the kind of the visual that I have when I think about exhausting myself, that you have no more, that you have nothing left. I used to have a coach that would say, I need you to give everything you have until your heart bursts, and then give me one more play after that. So give me everything you can until you die, and then give me one more after that, right? That is the level of exhaustion that I think about. And my father's mantra in life, and still to this day, is exhaust the moment. And when you really think about what you just said, to exhaust yourself in the day is hard enough, let alone do it in every moment. To do it in every moment, to be fully give all of yourself in the present moment, where your feet are, where your eyes are, where your ears are, to do that. That is a lofty goal. It's one of the reasons why my father was so great as an athlete and has been so great in many of the things that he's done in his life, because he holds himself to that standard. And so it is something that I grew up around. It was something that I've had the pleasure to learn from, but it is extremely difficult to embody on a daily basis. That is a mantra that I don't know if I could say that's mine. That's my father's, and there are other areas where I try to think about exhausting myself, and I've learned on the flip side of that, Ed, as much as we think about exhausting is the idea of exerting yourself, pushing yourself, and moving forward. It carries a connotation of action. I've learned too, on the flip side of that, to exhaust oneself is also equally important to be still, to rest, to rejuvenate, to recharge, to recalibrate. And really it's the yin and the yang. And I think in life, oftentimes, I've learned for myself to be optimal and to thrive. I've had to learn how to do that. I'll give you a quick story, and then I know I can go on. But I had the opportunity. A really dear friend of mine, a gentleman named Ken Lin. If you guys know Ken, Ken's the founder and CEO of Credit Karma. He's like a brother, great guy, built a really successful business. He had an exit recently. And he said, hey, I'm going to take a few of my friends. I'm going to celebrate. We're going to go do something. And we're going to go away for a weekend. I was fortunate to get the invite. And he took 10 guys to this place called Dirtfish, which is just outside of Seattle. And you raced rally cars for 3 days. And you had a private instructor with you teaching you how to drive race cars on dirt and tarmac. And it was like an adult playground, right? I mean, we were just getting after it. And I'm competitive. Like I am very competitive in everything that I do. I want to win. I want to be the best. I push myself. And so I'm around these 10 other guys. Some of them I knew, some of them I didn't. And so I wanted to go as fast as I could, Ed. I wanted to exhaust myself. I wanted to push myself. And the instructor the whole time is like, Ryan, you got to use the brake. You're going to break this car. You're going to flip us. You're going to break. And I'm trying to go as fast as I can. I'm trying to win. And it wasn't until the third day, the last day, that I started to understand and listen to what the instructor was telling me. He wasn't telling me to slam on the brake. He was telling me to feather the brake, use it gentle, and to be strategic with where I use the brake, because it would allow the car to navigate the course in a more efficient and effective way. And it would actually allow me to go faster. And I did. And I ended up winning with the group, best time. But the lesson that I learned, Ed, was sometimes in life, we got to understand how to use our brake. We can go exhaust ourselves. We can push ourselves. But if we don't learn how to use our brake and feather it and gentle, sometimes we may need to slam on it to adjust ourselves, to recalibrate ourselves, to help us navigate the course of life. We may be setting ourselves up to wreck ourselves. So that's kind of how I think about your question. And that story, I was reminded of that story as I was talking. So I wanted to share it.
That's terrific. I appreciate the story. Interesting that you, tough to put yourself in a race with a professional athlete who has won at the highest levels. But it's an interesting metaphor, and I like the concept of feathering the brake and using it strategically. Teresa, I want to talk about your two things with you first, and thank you for being here. One is Jakarta and coming to the Midwest from Jakarta when you were very young. And then I'm going to go to a question that your co-founder and partner, Lauren, suggested I ask you about. But you came here from Jakarta, Indonesia, when you were very young. Your dad was a professional, a highly educated professional there. And what did he do when you came here? How old were you?
So Ed, thanks again for having me. I'm not going to repeat what Ryan said, but he couldn't have said it better. I mean, what you, Betsy, and Lowenstein have done for the ecosystem has been nothing short of spectacular. And I want to give a special shout out, since it's International Women's Day, for a lot of the amazing things you have done and continue to do for underrepresented managers of all sorts in the venture ecosystem, and the generosity of the connections that you have made for myself, sounds like for Ryan, for many others on this call, is second to none. So very much appreciate being here, and always humbled to be on the same screen with the Super Bowl champion. But anyway, so my father was a dentist in Jakarta. My mother was a nurse. I was born, my parents were university students during the political revolution in the late 60s. We're ethnic Chinese. And so I think kind of coming of age during that when they're and actually there's an interesting book that was written recently called The Jakarta Effect, which evidently I didn't realize until more recently. There are things that governments use at times to try to destabilize places. And unfortunately, what is often a very effective tool is to get the majority to see other, meaning whatever the minority group may be, in this case in Indonesia, the ethnic Chinese, as something to be concerned about, and therefore strengthen the majority behind the current leadership or the new leadership that was coming in. Long story, but so, okay, why would my parents move from Jakarta, Indonesia to Detroit? I know Ryan spent some time there, to Detroit, actually Pontiac specifically, and then eventually to Buffalo, New York. And that was kind of the backdrop, right? So my parents, I was a very young child, like 2 or 3 when we came here. My sister wasn't born yet. She was born here in the States. My parents were just like, look, we need to, we need to try to see whatever we can do to get immigration into the United States where we can have a more politically stable situation. And though, of course, we'll be a minority, once again, it feels a lot more like stable political situation. Our kids will have a chance to do whatever they can do. Education in school was obviously always paramount for my parents. But in order to do this, we first lived with my aunt and uncle in Pontiac, about 2 miles from the Silver Dome. We lived in the apartment with my aunt and uncle and my 2 cousins above their Chinese restaurant. And my mom and dad, my uncle was kind enough to give them jobs there. So my dad worked as a dishwasher and my mom was a waitress, while my mom eventually got a certification for nursing so she could support my dad, which was quicker. And then he eventually got into dental school in the US and became a dentist. And long story short, that's how we ended up in Buffalo, New York, which also explains my dad and me and my sister's long-term Buffalo Bills fandom, despite the fact that we first landed outside of Pontiac, Detroit.
And one of the many people that you have mentored told me recently that he, like you, felt that engineering was one of the only paths that would be acceptable. And he said that in your case, and since you mentioned International Women's Day, in your case, it meant that when you got out of school with your engineering degree, you were often the only woman in the room or on the entire floor. Is engineering a path? It's obviously done very well for you. You've done very well for it. Is engineering a path that you would take again if you were starting new and had the full array of opportunities available to you?
So if I'm being honest, I would actually say yes, but that's with the benefit of time. Because certainly when I was an undergraduate, there were times when it felt that for good reason, for good intentions, my parents, my father in particular, had made it very clear to me that there were a limited number of things which he was willing to help pay for in terms of my college education. And when I say help pay for, it is with great gratitude that I would say, my father took out a second mortgage on our house to help do the parent contribution, because the financial aid and the over $100,000 in personal student loans that I took would not have been enough. So I took that very seriously. That's a pretty strong incentive. When dad is like, well, you're thinking about changing your major. Well, maybe you should transfer to community college for that, because I don't think that's a major that's going to pay off my mortgage. Not that he expected me to pay it literally, but just that he would feel like that would have been a wise decision for him. But now, obviously, now being in venture and being in tech, I think, and not that I actually use any of my engineering skills, and as as my 13-year-old son would tell me, the computing languages that I learned how to code in, like, you know, he's amazed if there's anybody who's still alive that knows how to code in those first generation languages. And I never even told him about the fact that my first computer programs were saved on not punch cards. I'm old, but I'm not that old, but actually on cassette tapes. You could use your cassette tape from your boombox and flip it over, and you could save your computer program on the other side. Anyway, so it obviously has really, it's helped give me the confidence to be, and I think those early days of being the only whatever, right? The only woman, the only fill in the blank person in the room, and just going through undergraduate engineering and having that be the case, 9 times out of 10, and then working in General Motors, which I think is the example you're talking about, as a summer intern, and having 1,000 engineers and having 2 full-time female engineers out of 1,000. Granted, I was a summer intern. Those experiences made it seem like, and we still have a long way to go, but if I think about what tech was like in the late 90s when I came to Silicon Valley, I don't know, at least having 1 or 2 other women in the room when you had like 25 people at your startup, it didn't seem daunting to me. It just kind of felt like the way things were. And then I'm gonna say one brief thing about that. I learned early on that you could either take that as something that, all the reasons why it was challenging, but and maybe this isn't a good trait for venture capitalists. It's certainly a good trait for entrepreneurs, but I learned to try to take a little bit more optimistic view about that, because I realized that whether it was because I was the only female, or at the time I was, one of the youngest people in the room, or I was never quite the athlete, but I'm a huge sports fan, as you and Ryan know. If you were the smallest person on the field, I realized that sometimes being underestimated is actually a really hidden asset. So early in my career, whether that was in engineering meetings, or later at startup meetings, or later in venture meetings, I would sometimes sit and ask questions that were open-ended and allow people to answer them. And they would sometimes end up giving me, like in a business negotiation, because they felt the need to explain things to me in a more detailed way, because they didn't think that I was going to get it. You actually end up getting a lot of information from somebody that way that they don't intend to be giving you, or because they underestimate you, they're like, well, this isn't going to mean anything. So let me expound on that, give a little bit more. And so then when you kind of sit there and synthesize all of that, and you maybe kind of come back with, oh, but you said like 15 minutes ago, this and that and this. So like, why should we agree to the following? I just think that there are times when you can choose to take it as a positive. You could be insulted that somebody's underestimating you, that somebody's asking you to get them coffee or take notes for them. But I think it's also a tell. When you realize that's how they're thinking of you, you can probably observe things because they think that you're not really there. And you could glean some really important insights.
And I will also say that as a parent, and I know this is something that you and I have talked about, as a parent, particularly when your kids hit 10, 12, adolescence, being underestimated in the presence of your children and their friends gives you a phenomenal opportunity to observe and learn. Or maybe it's being overlooked. But the thing I want to go to, and then I want to talk about your respective firms, because part of what's exciting to me about having the two of you here is not just your individual amazing accomplishments, but also you are both people who are investing as LPs very actively and investing as venture capitalists directly into companies very actively. And you've been through some cycles. And so I want to make sure that we're going to talk a little bit about your firms and then about the market. But Teresa, you went from, borrowing a lot of money and your dad taking a second mortgage on your house to being asked to, I believe, be the only woman of Asian descent to speak as the commencement speaker at Stanford Graduate School of Business, which you attended. And Lauren, your co-founder at ACRO, suggested that I ask you a bit about that commencement speech. And congratulations, that must have been enormously gratifying for you to be asked and to have that experience.
It was certainly an honor and humbling and also terrifying for any of you, and there are several on this call who either went to Stanford Business School or know Stanford Business School students. They are incredibly smart, talented, but also challenging. They think of themselves, I think they still use this term, we used to be like, well, we're the customers here, not we're the students, we're the customers. So I'm like, okay, with that in mind, and I'm like the 20 minutes between them and them getting their diplomas and them going off with their friends to celebrate their graduation. Like, what can I possibly say? But you, Ed, who were very helpful, and as I was thinking about this, Lauren and several other folks said, look, you should talk about something that you feel passionately about and that you think is something that could be important and relevant for everybody. And I won't reiterate everything, but basically the point of it was everyone in that audience was in a position to be very influential in whatever they chose to do. And specifically in probably, since a lot of them would either, join startups, found startups, invest in startups like Ryan and myself and others, but that ecosystem, 2022 stock market notwithstanding, right? The venture-backed ecosystem is the vast majority of market cap for public companies, right? Depending on the date and time, 5 of the 5 largest US market cap companies, 4 of the 5 largest, 3 of the 5, for sure, the first 3 companies to reach $1 trillion in market cap were all venture-backed startups. That's important because if you think about equity, not equality, equity, and I mean that in both senses of the words, meaning equity ownership, being on the cap table, and equity in terms of access to opportunities, having equitable access to ownership potential in those private companies, I think has proven to be one of the largest ways for wealth creation, in particular generational wealth creation, which is the disparity is particularly acute if you look at those opportunities in the US between, Black or Latinx individuals, and even to a lesser extent, but still true, women versus men in this country. So I brought that up to basically turn it into a positive, right? Which is like, we have the opportunity, like if you're starting a company, you're joining a company, be intentional about who you're going to include in either your team, the management team, because all of those people are going to get equity, who you're going to take money from as an investor. Obviously, you want people who are going to help you add value and grow the company, but you can also think about, there's a business benefit that the McKinsey studies show, for example, that there have been 3 separate McKinsey studies that would have done every 2 years that show that companies that have gender and ethnically diverse management teams and boards outperform on an ROE basis, return on equity basis, by 25 to 35%. That's meaningful. So hopefully you're doing it because you believe, as I know we all do, that there are cultural benefits in terms of company culture, morale, retention, but also there's like business benefits. So being more thoughtful about who you invite to have opportunity, be that employment opportunity, investment opportunity, board opportunity, advisory opportunity, that is like a win-win-win. It benefits your company, it benefits those other individuals, and it begins to create more opportunity for a wider set of people who maybe haven't been asked to be part of those rooms before. And they're being asked because they're incredibly talented and highly successful in their own right, and maybe they were overlooked.
I love that you used that opportunity to drive home the point of equitable access and wealth creation. And that's it's a consistent theme for you, and you and Ryan have both done tremendous amounts of work and have had tremendous impact in exactly that sphere, which is another reason I was so excited to bring the two of you together. I also needed to have you here, Teresa, once Ryan agreed, because I'm completely unequipped to discuss football with someone who, well, really with anyone, but with someone who played pro ball. And I wanted to have someone with expertise who could appreciate all that Ryan accomplished in his financial world life. But I want to go to the financial world life for both of you. And Ryan, the press reported in October of last year that Next Play Capital had closed an oversubscribed Fund 3 at 200 million, and that you were now closing in on $500 million of AUM in the firm that you started now 9 or 10 years ago. So congratulations. I know earlier you mentioned you're an emerging manager, $500 million-ish, 450 million in AUM, 3 or more funds raised. And by the way, like, congrats, great timing, because it was easier to raise last year than this year. And there's an extent to which you make your own luck. Can you talk a little bit about Next Play and what you're doing and where you are?
Yeah, happy to. And Teresa and I can share notes about football as well, and we'll be more than happy to add to bring you up to speed and make you feel welcomed and educated to be able to be well versed to talk about it beyond our presence. You have
no idea how tall an order that is.
She's a Buffalo Bills fan, so I don't want to get into it too much, but it was a tough year for them. It was exciting, but not the finish that they were hoping for, given all the hype going into it. But Next Play, all the hype. Next Play was started with a really simple mission. And the mission was really simple around how do we give our community the ability to have a seat at the table to invest with the best venture funds, and hopefully at times be able to invest with some transformational companies along the way. On top of that, part of the mission has always been around giving our community the opportunity to meet the men and women who are elite at what they do, to build relationships, to learn, and to engage with them on a consistent basis. And so that's an important part of what we do. Obviously, the investment is what we lead with, and we spend a lot of time and make a lot of sacrifices to try to do that well. But it's also equally important to help our community understand the why behind what we're doing and the why behind where their dollars are and how it's all working in their favor, hopefully. Started it roughly 9 years ago. Prior to that, I was running a startup. I co-founded a startup with a former football player. There's a few meatheads out there that have a few marbles rolling around upstairs. A gentleman named Jeb Terry was in business school and called me and said, "Hey, I got this idea. I think you could help me with it. Let's co-found this business together." We did that. When you're young, you have no responsibilities. You take great leaps of faith, and we did that, and we slaved away at that for 4-ish years before being acquired. Prior to that, I worked at a family office for 2 years. It was right after I retired. I wasn't sure what I was going to do after I was done playing. I thought I was going to go work at my father's business, which was an investment platform here in Silicon Valley. They sold that business, so I couldn't go there. I think he held it against me that I went to UCLA Ed and decided to sell the business before, because he's a Trojan, and sold the business before I could work there. So I went to a family office, spent 2 years there as an investor and an analyst. And so I was trying to figure out what I was doing. And anyways, I through all of that process, and obviously being in the locker room, I constantly saw a lot of people that I was very close with, a lot of men and women that I built relationships with that had accumulated an awful lot of capital, start putting dollars to work in startups. Hey, Ryan, look at this deal. I'm investing in it. Will you invest with me? Hey, Ryan, I want to start this business. Will you invest in it? Will you help me? Hey, Ryan, I'm looking at this fund. What do you think? And the reality is the vast majority of the things that I saw, if not all, had a very low probability of success. And quite frankly, it was just garbage. And I knew that there could be a better solution. And the reality is we all know, venture, the chasm and the delta between the top quartile funds and the best performing funds and everybody else is so massive. Unless you're getting access to those funds and putting dollars to work, the juice may not be worth the squeeze. And it makes it extremely difficult to do that and to invest effectively. And on top of that, if you're an individual, the chances of getting into some of the elite firms is extremely hard and extremely challenging, let alone impossible. And then if you want to try to create some diversification around that, so you're not putting all your eggs in one basket, maybe even harder for some of the individuals because of the dollars that they could put to work. And so we decided to create Next Play to try to solve for these issues and find ways to give, again, our community a seat at the table. And fast forward to where we are today, you alluded to the fund that we just closed. It was our third flagship fund, our fifth fund, and proud of that. So we have a flagship fund to fund that was the $200 million fund. We're investors in 30 plus managers, pretty much the traditional names that we've all heard of. It's somewhat of a barbell effect. The Excels, the Bessemers, Lightspeeds of the world, the large platform players, blue chip managers that have been around for 20 plus years, the Union Squares and First Rounds and others. And then we have obviously some of the smaller micro firms and managers like a Floodgate or a Cowboy or First Round, which I alluded to. In that product, we have a dedicated direct fund as well, Ed, that co-invests alongside many of our managers. We typically invest in A's and B's, right? $2 to $5 million checks. And there's areas that we lean into that we feel like we have a certain lens of where the puck may be going. But oftentimes, as you can imagine, given the community of investors and the people that we have a part of Next Play, we see a lot of things in the world of sports media and entertainment. We don't do a lot of sports tech deals. I don't think we've done any. Might be too close to the sun. So that's probably why we shy away from that. We have an emerging leader fund that focuses on managers raising Roman numerals 1 through 3, which is one of the reasons why I'm grateful for the work you're doing and helping to lead the way and being a source for us and thinking about managers. And we also have a cloud all-star fund that we don't market, but it has 50 of the top cloud CEOs, Jennifer from PagerDuty, Eric from Zoom and the likes, along with Paul Rudd, Reese Witherspoon, Steph Curry, and a number of elite athletes and influencers that are investors in that fund. That fund only invests in the cloud sector. And by the end of the month, you'll probably hear more news about the firm, but we'll grow from a team of 20 to probably a team of 30 here, and we'll triple our AUM and continue to accelerate our efforts to go after our mission. And so proud of the work we've done. Like many founders that are on this call, and whether you're a founder of a company or a firm, that where you think you should be and where you are as a founder, that delta is, I call that the MF territory. Because it just plays with your mind. And I am nowhere near where I think what we're capable of doing and what we should be doing. I'm proud of what we've done to date, but man, there is a lot of work ahead and there are a lot of different challenges and obstacles. And, like the great philosopher Biggie once said, more money, more problems. And so, you got to navigate through all of that and navigate the new waters. So, I couldn't be more excited about the team, what we're trying to execute around and trying to find ways to provide a lot of value to our investors beyond just generating really strong returns.
So you know that you're now going to be like mobbed with people. You said all these amazing things, but what a lot of people just heard was you're hiring venture investors and allocators because you're going from 20 to 30. Maybe you've already hired, but you're still going to get mobbed for that. And you are investing in emerging managers and people, particularly in this market, and particularly for someone who does understand how challenging venture is as an asset class for underrepresented managers, in particular, many of whom, not all, are emerging. I know that people are going to flock to you for that from this. But I also want to focus on one thing you said before, having Teresa jump in a little bit more with Acrew and the Acrew story. So a lot of athletes, you hear about, they're making angel investments or they're setting up a family office. It is so different to build a diversified financial institution like you are building, where you have these multiple products, a flagship fund, a fund that does cloud with all of these individuals. And you are not the, figurehead for the firm. This is a firm that you built, having worked in other financial firms after your pro career. And I want to sort of pause on the fact that there's a lot to talk about in terms of firm building, which is translatable to startup founders, and it's translatable to other people trying to build a fund from scratch. So the question I'm coming back to is, you talked about your dad selling his financial services firm before you had an opportunity to work there. There's an interview you gave right around the time that your son was born, and you said that you wanted your child to see a leader, someone they respect, someone who's willing to do whatever it takes to help them succeed. When you were playing football, you were using your mother's last name rather than your dad's, so you weren't trying to leverage that. You didn't have the other family business to go into. Are those two examples of doing whatever it takes to help your child succeed? Or are those two examples to the contrary?
Well, one, I didn't have the choice in the last name. My mother decided at a young age. I had a mom that was 22 and a father that was 20. I had grandparents that were 40 and 42. I knew my great grandmother, who was born in 1898. I actually just got a couple pictures of her recently, who lived until she was 98. Awesome, Grandma Rhodey. I used to go over and eat oranges at her house. I had all these people around me at a young age, and so my mom and my dad had a lot of wisdom around them as well. And when I was born, they split. And so my mom decided, you know what, I'm going to raise you, and I'm going to decide to give you my last name. I'm going to do the heavy lifting. International Women's Day. Shout out to all the moms and the women out there. I got 5 sisters. What an amazing decision that she made. And I'm grateful for that decision that she made at such a young age, to say, hey, I think that I want you to carry my last name. And the reason that it was beneficial is because, to your point, Ed, I didn't have to carry really the burden of having my father's last name, which is Lott. Ronnie Lott is my father, and carrying that shadow with me. But it was nonetheless, it still followed me pretty quickly. Even quick story, even in high school, I'll never forget, had one of the best high school football games I ever had in my career in high school. And one of the things that you would do back in the day, because there was no social media, you would look at the stats the next day in the Saturday morning paper. And so you couldn't wait to open up the Saturday morning paper to see how you compared to everybody else. And I'll never forget opening up the paper, couldn't wait to see how I stacked up. And the headline read, "Ronnie Lott's son has a great game." And I was like, oh man, I can't hide from it. But nonetheless, it allowed me to continue to make a name for myself. And so I'm grateful that my mom decided to make that decision, and I'm proud that my son gets to carry my last name and my mom's maiden name of Nice to this day. And when I think about why I wake up, and when I think about what we're trying to do at Next Play, no doubt do I oftentimes think about my son and the legacy that I'm trying to leave for him, and the example that I want to set for him, and how excited I would be if he had the opportunity one day to work at a firm that I had the opportunity to build. And when I think about, more importantly, to build and build it on foundation and values and principles and a mission that is true to who we are, and I think true to who I am and true to who our firm is. Right? There's a lot of things. We look at a lot of managers, we look at a lot of decks, we look at a lot of businesses. There's a lot of numbers out there. Oftentimes, some of the differentiating things that I think give people an edge is it's their mission, it's their values. Because usually those are really unique to who they are and who that business is. And so I think our values and our mission and how we're building and the things we think about, like building for legacy and thinking about putting others first, helps drive us and fuel us in a way that I think I have the best job in the world. And I know I'm not supposed to be in the chair that I'm in. If I think about where I came from and what I've gone through, the odds of me being in this seat. Yeah, man, the odds of me being in this seat are just insurmountable. And I'm here, and I'm grateful for that. And so yeah, I get excited to the ability to show up every day and be my best.
Thank you. That's great. Teresa, being your best. So 9 times on the Forbes Midas list of the 100 best mathematically most successful venture investors in the world. One of the subjects of the book, Alpha Girls, which is a great read and a gift for people on International Women's Day, about the original badass women in Silicon Valley who started things. And you are a founder of a $1 billion fund complex yourself. And you have been amazingly philanthropic and almost bafflingly quiet about your philanthropic endeavors. So we'll spotlight some of that a little later, but tell us about the funds that you've raised at Acrew and what the firm is doing.
Well, thank you for that way too kind introduction, Ed. My mom sends thank you for being the only person who can pump me up more than her, than she can. You know, it's interesting and this has been a great conversation, maybe because we know each other, but Ed, as per Ed, I don't know about you, Ryan, he didn't share any of the topics or questions in advance, but no. I just want to key on the fact that Ryan said that mission and values, he as a, very successful selector of managers and companies through his direct funds. It's interesting because, one of the key things about Acrew when we co-founded it, and I think both of you said there's a lot of analogies, right? Like whether you're a startup person on this call or a venture person on this call. And frankly, the biggest thing that I would say there were 2 big things when we started Acrew, and technically we're still an emerging manager too, because we're investing out of Acrew 2, which is an early stage fund, and Acrew Diversified Capital Fund, which is our growth stage fund. One was, and it's kind of hokey, we love our double entendres, right? Acrew Capital, like it's in the name. We were like team. We believe that venture is a team sport, and thus choosing who your co-founders are. And eventually, as Ryan, and by the way, congratulations, I'm excited to hear it. I think there's something big going on if he's going for 20, 30 people, but we won't make him say anything that he's not allowed to say, but it's very exciting. is kind of who you choose to be your teammates, right? And it is not only about, do you have complementary areas of investment interest, right? So like we tend to be very thematic at A-Crew. So, I spend a lot of time, and Assad and Mark and I spend a lot of time on cybersecurity and infrastructure software. Lauren and Vishal spend a lot of time on fintech. Those are two of our three biggest areas. But it's much more about, do we gel together as a team, right? Meaning the analogy, and I don't know why in VC people always use baseball analogies, which, it is what it is. I won't try to use a football analogy because Ryan will crush me at that. But so I sometimes use, because partnerships are oftentimes like 3 to 5 people, I sort of use the analogy of basketball, which some of you guys know I'm also a huge basketball fan and football. Well, anyway, sports fan. Can't play any of them, but like to watch. I was like, you don't, no doubt, well, maybe some people, Steph Curry is clearly one of the greatest point guards ever. But if we had 5 point guards, and I won't pick on any teams right now who maybe have this problem, meaning you got 5 players who all want the ball and want to control the offense, right? That's not going to work. That's why you need to find people who are excellent at their individual investing areas, but actually work and gel together as a team. But part of that is also just, sounds weird to say, because I think startup tech companies get this inherently. It's like, you wouldn't want 3 VPs of engineering and no head of sales. Like it sounds silly for me to even say it, but there are people who don't necessarily see venture investing in that same way, right? It's like, we just want to get the best of the best. I'm like, okay, well, that's awesome. But like, what if they all play the same position? Is that really going to make the best portfolio? Is that going to make the best team? So anyway, long way of saying our name is Hokey, but that's because we really believe that that's true. It's core to what we do. And the second thing on like mission and core values, I'm not going to go over them because they're like front and center on our website, on the A-Crew website. And that I give all the credit to some of my younger founders who are like, hey, we invest in startups all the time, and they all tell us, and we believe that like having agreement on what the mission is and what the core values are, like what are we trying to build? And I love Ryan's analogy of like, it's an an MF to get from, oh boy, Lowenstein, can that be bleeped?
Not a chance.
From where you are today to your vision of where you want to be. But having that vision is, I think, what really drives, sounds like Ryan and his partners, me and my partners. And a lot of times venture firms, I don't think we would invest in a tech startup that couldn't articulate to us like, hey, what's your core vision? Where are you trying to get to? And like, what are the things you care about? So therefore, how are you going to attract, like, how are you going to go from like 5 people to 500 or 5,000 people if you're successful? If you can't articulate that to me to get me to invest in you, how are you going to get 4,999 other people to come and join you on your journey? I think that those same principles are super important and helpful and differentiating in venture, because not everybody sees it as a team sport, even though we all love our team sports analogies. And not everybody sees that, like, well, our mission, our value is like to make as much money as we can for our investors by picking the best companies. Okay, but like, what's inspiring about that? What's inspiring about that to your future team members? What's inspiring about that to the best entrepreneurs who are going to have 2, 3, 5 firms, who all have strong track records? And here I agree, Ryan could not be more right. It is, having looked at a bunch of different asset classes, venture is like, the top quartile is like amazing, even in bad environments relative to other asset classes. Honestly, even in good environments, like forget about the bottom quartile, but even like the 3rd quartile is like below, like you could make more money putting it in like, an S&P index fund, right? and you're not locked up for 10 years. So the differentiation between very good to average is massive. So I think that, you know, if you don't have some edge, some reason, it's super competitive. I'm not going to say it's nearly as hard as being in the NFL. Certainly, I know it meant like not just being in the NFL, but being a Super Bowl champion. I don't know how many players in the history of time have ever had that. So I'm not going to say that, but there's a huge difference. And I thought it was really interesting and humbling. I didn't know this, that like every Tuesday when Ryan said, you know, they bring in new guys every Tuesday, and like, you know, every week they're like sitting here trying to figure out how they're going to replace you. But I guarantee you the difference between bad week or not, like, you know, all you have to do is see the stats or watch one of Ryan's game films. On average, the delta between someone like Ryan, who's at the top of the top, and the 15 linebackers that they maybe brought in, I think just to mess with Ryan, because clearly they weren't going to really get rid of him. I mean, that's massive, right? So, and what's massive about it is not just that, it's not that one point in time, that one Tuesday walkthrough or whatever. It's who can do it over the course of many games in that situation in many years. And in venture, you want to talk years, who can do it over the course of 10, which the funds are generally 10 years long, 10 years over multiple funds. So anyway, long way of saying I couldn't agree more with what Ryan said. I think you need to, and there's no right or wrong. Obviously, it's like your values are your own values, and they have to come from your own lived experience and your own genuine partners, unique teamwork. But if you have that, it doesn't guarantee success. And certainly I think there are people who can be successful without clarity of that. I just think it makes it it's becoming a harder and harder way to differentiate yourself, because this is what's exciting, is that I'm finding that more, and this wasn't always true 20 plus years ago when I started in the venture business as a lowly associate, like entrepreneurs were not asking like as many questions about why, you know, what made you, like they were asked questions about like why your firm is different or that, but they weren't asking questions about like, hey, how are you going to help me build a broader network of potential recruits to my company? Because, you know, if I'm successful, I got to grow 10 times the number of people this year. How are you going to help me get access to different advisors than the ones that I already have access to today? And whether or not they use the words equity, diversity, inclusion, what they're just saying is like, hey, we need more and we need different. And we've got this. What are you going to bring that's different? That's going to be more. And that is, so I think that for where, if that is aligned with what you care about, that is very aligned with what entrepreneurs increasingly care about. And that's a real reason for excitement.
So go ahead, Ryan.
Oh, sorry. I just want to piggyback up. Teresa said something that made me think a lot about the huddle. You know, we think a lot about who's in your huddle. And we talk about that concept, who's in your crew, who's in your huddle. Clearly, we might talk a lot about sports analogies on this particular Zoom, but it's extremely important. And in an area where you're trying to assess and do diligence and understand people and read people really quickly, trying to figure out how to do that in an efficient and effective way. One of the things that I've even taught folks younger than me to think about is when you meet somebody, ask them who's in their huddle. Who are their 5 best advisors? Who are their 5 best friends? What are the 5 books that they read? What are the 5 people that they count on in times of adversity? All of a sudden, you can start to get a picture of who someone is, what a company is, what are the 5 best investors, you can start to get a sense. It's not always accurate, but it can give you somewhat of a sense of who folks are. Because I know in my professional career in sports and in business, man, who's in your huddle matters. When we won a Super Bowl, Ed, we had phenomenal, I'm talking badass, talented assassins that were trained and proven winners. That it was an unbelievable experience, my rookie year. And no matter what we faced, there was no doubt in our mind that we thought we could find a way to win. 4 people on that defense that I was a part of are now in the Hall of Fame. That's unheard of, to be able to line up and play with 4 Hall of Famers. On the flip side, Teresa joked about it. She joked about it. I was in Detroit. Hey, just gave me that little elbow. I was in Detroit. I was on the Detroit Lions, the worst team in NFL history, 0-16. Our huddle was terrible. It was awful. People pointing fingers, no continuity, nobody accountable to playing for something bigger than self. It was so frustrating. And no doubt it was the complete opposite. Every time we faced a challenge, we thought we were going to fold and lose. There was no confidence in one another. And so it played out that way on the field. And we've seen that in business and other areas. Who's in your huddle is so important. And it is something that I think many of the great managers, and Teresa, I'm sure you do this, when you're really assessing beyond the models, when you're really trying to assess what is this executive team, who are these founders and what makes them go and what's going to give them the ability to climb to the top of that mountain, because it's going to take some really special human beings to get there, to try to make the impossible possible. I mean, that's what every founder is trying to do. And that's the beautiful thing.
I love that answer, and the extent to which you and Teresa are in sync is terrific. So I have to also just throw in, and I apologize, it's not a sports anecdote or analogy, but James Brown, who tragic figure in a number of ways, but also clearly someone who was at the top of the game. There was a time in the 60s where James Brown had 5 drummers. And one of them went to one of the other drummers. And James Brown was also famous for, or maybe infamous, for turning around mid-performance, and everything was improvised, turning around mid-performance, going to different musicians in his band, and he would do this. And that meant, I'm docking you $20 because you missed a note, or because you came in wrong, or you weren't watching me and you didn't punctuate my dance move with some riff or some, something. So 2 of the drummers got together and said, there are 5 of us here. We cannot have a band with 5 drummers. We got to figure out a way to get rid of the other guys. And they did. And it became a 2-drummer band. And you can't have 5 drummers or 5 VPs of engineering. But your rubric of, who are your 5 best friends, who are your 5 best advisors, 5 best investors. So we haven't talked about First Close Partners, which, and I don't know if we've said this publicly before, but when First Close Partners started in 2020, it was originally called TEB LLC, which was the working title because it was Teresa, Ed, and Betsy. Betsy is my wife. And as friends started knocking on our door saying, I see what you're doing, I want to be involved. And, Josh Koppelman and Regina Benjamin, the former Surgeon General, and PJ and Annika and Carolina Horanka Mendoza. Teresa said, when the first sort of person who was going to be an LP proactively approached and said, let me know when you're ready to take my money. Teresa said, well, okay, Ed, here's the exercise. Who is your dream team? Who are the best people that you would want to have involved in this project, and why? And it started this whole conversation, which led to First Close, which we're now deploying out of our second fund, investing in underrepresented managers. We do not do anything direct through First Close. So that exercise of, who are the best people? If we let this other person in, who else do you want in? And it's a great framing, and it's about team, and who are you making money with, and for whom are you making money? So I want to now run into a market discussion, and these are going to be jump balls, which someone has told me jump ball is not a football term. So
it could be when the QB throws up a go get in a Hail Mary situation, right? When you say it's a jump ball in the end zone with your tallest wide receiver and your tallest D-back, maybe.
See, flexing her football knowledge. I like it.
I thought that was a conversation about religion. I heard about Mary and hailing her, and I don't know. All right, so I'm going to read you a quote by a market participant that that I'm going to posit the three of us know and respect, citing two research reports that both concluded, quote, too much capital has gone into venture capital. One report argued we need to shrink the amount of venture funding by 50%, a stat almost every VC agrees with. Ironically, 100% of VCs would argue that their fund should be in the half that survives. And the other report said, totally agree, but we should allocate capital to smaller funds. Smaller funds are better positioned for current exit landscape, better alignment with entrepreneurs, better alignment with LPs. And the money stat from that paper is today there are over 408 funds over 250 million, and there are 30 over $1 billion, and most of this fund size growth took place in the last 10 years. So performance is going to lag. And I mentioned this stat, Teresa, you talked about top quartile and bottom quartile, and you gave the case against investing in venture capital unless you find a really differentiated brand. So before I tell you who that quote is from, do you think that we are at a time where the asset class needs to materially shrink by 50%?
You know, and I don't know the stats, but I was around when the asset class did materially shrink in 2000, 2001. And that was both in terms of number of funds, and actually I was at a place even in terms of size of our own funds, right? Because funds had grown dramatically between, call it 1998, 1999 to 2000. And then we actually ended up cutting our fund in half, as did some others. So do I think that there's probably some opportunity for pullback? Yes. Do I think it's 50%? I think that seems like a lot. And here's why. It's not because I'm trying to justify. I don't want to be one of those people who's like, oh, we're in the 50%. I look at this, the reason. So what I would say is I'm short-term bearish, I'm medium to long-term bullish. And here's why. If we think about the market opportunity for venture-backed tech startups in 2000, 2001, 2002, 2003 versus what we have now in 2023, 2024, 2025, I think the scale of opportunity is so much larger. Now, it's still going to be about like, are you finding and winning and selecting the great companies? But just if you think about a specific company, right? So we'll take some simple statistics because they're a few years old, but I'm sure they continued to be true because it was a talk I gave a few years ago. In 1996, when Netscape went public, the total number of devices in the world that had internet access was between 60 and 70 million. By 2017, granted, that was a few years ago, but when I did, that number was 5 billion. So we do this to our companies all the time, right? So I'm looking around, we're like, what's the size of your addressable market, right? Like, obviously you still have to build a cool, you have to build a great and differentiated technology. You have to find your go-to-market motion, but like the addressable market, like the canvas of opportunity, that's just one example. And there's millions of others, but that one kind of just like blew my mind because I was around when, Netscape, when Netscape was Mosaic, and I downloaded the first web browser when I was at Stanford, actually. And so I was like, so there's just one example, right? And we aren't even talking about some of the newer, like, so you can debate whether or not you think the emergence of generative AI and large language models, which I believe are likely to be, because of the scale cost to both develop and then just run the infrastructure for that, I believe will be fought out against the large players in an analogous way to the cloud infrastructure platforms, just because the scale of what you need, that's the reason why it's like AWS and Microsoft and so on. But what did that create? That created massive opportunity for many new venture-backed tech startups, not to own that layer, but to build everything from tooling and visibility so that people could make their applications cloud provider agnostic to whole new applications. So these are the reasons why I think saying that there's 50%, that seems like way too much to me, because that says that the opportunity to find the next amazing venture-backed company in 2023 is 50% less than it was in 2021. That seems pretty extreme to me. Now, are there some managers that maybe raised more money than their prior funds, you know, ourselves included, right? But I think what the smart manager, and Ryan too, I mean, look, if you're a manager and you've been successful, it's likely that your second fund is going to be bigger than your first fund, and your third fund is going to be bigger than your second fund. Like there's just like startups, right? Like the companies doing what rarely raise less capital in the future than they have in the past. But I think smart, thoughtful managers like the Ryans and others on this call the world, like we will moderate our deal pace to match with the opportunity set in front of us. This is why I say short-term bearish, medium-term bullish. I talked about the tech reasons why I'm medium-term bullish, but it's not like, okay, well, just because I used to invest, you know, X millions of dollars a quarter in 2020 and 2021, like right now, we're not. And it's not that we're not looking. We think there's still long-term opportunities. Part of it is like pricing expectations have not necessarily come into line with investor pricing expectations. Part of it is the really great companies are probably, you know, they're waiting it out. They're like, pricing's not so great right now. I'm going to wait. I can go a few more quarters. So it just means that the last funds are going to last longer than the fund before. And that I think actually benefits everybody, LPs and GPs included, because it gives people time diversity in everything from pricing environment to types of technologies that are really being invested in business models. Anyway, so long answer, short answer, will there be some pullback? No doubt. Might it be like it was in 2000? Possibly. I don't think it was 50%. Do I think even if 50% happens, do I think that's the right thing, or is that possibly an overcorrection by the asset allocators? I think it would be, because I don't believe there's 50% less opportunity, even if you take slowdown in pace in 2023 and 2024 than there was in 2020.
Ryan, do you want to react?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, Teresa touched on a lot of truth there, which was, thank you for sharing that. I mean, the reality is too, the asset class is mature, right? The entire industry has grown in itself. The opportunity set for young founders to start companies it's never been cheaper than the history of mankind to go and start a business. The opportunity set to look at the global landscape now as an investor, as the aperture has opened up. The fact that companies now are staying private longer. Teresa made the point at the very beginning of this about equity. And I think about my mom, who doesn't have the ability to participate in the private sector. She could obviously invest in the public side, but the companies now that are staying private longer and longer, the bulk of the value creation is being done on the private side. So you have a lot of the community, a lot of people out there right now that don't have the ability to actually participate in where the value creation and the opportunity to put equity to work, obtain equity in these companies because they're excluded from it, right? Because they're not accredited investors, blah, 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 all these other things. And so I think all of that said, I think that there's obviously more capital in this industry than there has been in the past. I do think that there's going to be a slowdown, especially at the later stages. I think there will be a pullback. I think Teresa mentioned that valuations and pricing and understanding where to price something right now is extremely difficult. And when you have that uncertainty, it creates anxiety. When you have anxiety, it creates fear, and then fear, you have paralysis by analysis, and people don't move. And so when you don't have the ability to comp and see opportunities in a traditional way, you have a lot of investors that are sitting on the sidelines right now. On the flip side of that, as Teresa alluded to, we can be long-term bullish because the reality is the number of platforms, the number of opportunity sets, the number of things that are problems in our own personal and professional lives that we wish there was a problem for, a solution for, that there's a young man, a young woman out there finding ways to be innovative and be creative and build a business to do just that. We couldn't be more excited, right? I mean, the reality is that you have a lot of people that have spun out of companies or have gotten laid off from companies that said, you know what, screw working for the man. I'm going to take my destiny, can put it in my own hands, and I'm going to go build something. This is an opportunity that I have. You have a lot of people right now that there is capital. I think the savviest investors, Teresa being one of them, they're looking right now. They're hunting at the earlier stages for these young minds that are finding ways, because the pendulum is swung back in the favor of investors, to be able to capture these young minds at a valuation that may be more attractive, to get more ownership, that knowing when the pendulum starts to swing back, as it has, as history has told us, that all of a sudden you have larger exit opportunities. And so all of these variables we're taking into consideration. I think the entire industry. I think we also, at the first time in the history of man, where we actually get a chance to hear venture used to be very tight knit. Everybody kept all the information close to the chest. It was a black box. You didn't really know what your neighbor was doing, what another company was doing. There's so much information out there. And so we're starting to learn best practices. We're starting to better understand the possibilities out there. I will say, Teresa mentioned something too, is at the end of the day, you want people in your huddle that have been through different cycles, have been through different environments to help support you as a young founder. And I think that we're going to also start to see a flight to quality, a flight to expertise, a flight to managers that have been through different seasons. And you're going to see founders start to want to work with people that can be really helpful, want to be on their boards, that want to be there in the trenches with them. And there aren't a lot of firms that can say that they've been around through multiple cycles, or a lot of men and women that have that expertise. So I think we're going to see those individuals have the advantage in this current window of time. And so it's something that we're trying to pay attention to and lean into more and more. But I'll use a sports analogy because I'll finish with that. You know, when you have an away game, or when you're playing in an environment that's a little different, a little uncomfortable, and quite frankly, actually when it's raining out, that's what I feel like. It's raining out. Weather doesn't feel, it's not the ideal situation. The ground is uncertain. The way that you play the game has to change. You still have to find a way to win. You still have to find a way to execute. And when you're in an environment that's a little bit uncomfortable, where it's not ideal, where the weather's not perfect, what you revert back to is fundamentals. And I think that's one of the things all investors right now are reverting back to, traditional fundamentals. How are we actually truly valuing this company? We're not taking 2 hours or 2 weeks to do diligence. Maybe we'll take a little longer to do the diligence that's really needed to put in the fundamentals to make wise investments. And I think that hopefully will result in better decision-making and produce better returns for those that get the opportunity to line up and play with some of the best young founders out there.
I love that analogy, Ryan, especially about the sort of the rainy field conditions, right? Because, and it goes back, I know it was a different sports analogy, but it makes me go back to something you said earlier, which is sometimes when you realize what the environment is giving you, it's a time when you have to go slower to gain yardage and make progress.
Yep.
Right. And you go back to fundamentals, which is both, you know, and I say this to LPs, right? You talk about more time to make decisions, because, you know, I'm sure maybe others get asked too, right? So have we started to, and I agree, by the way, the opportunities right now are very much an early stage. And then for those with price discipline, I actually think there's some interesting price discipline opportunities at the growth stage. And maybe that's just based on my experience having helped raise our first growth fund at my former firm in October of 2008. That was fun. But there were some awesome investments because many other people were just like not in the market. Anyway, but the going slow, going to first principles and like more time to make decisions. People are always asking like, have we seen pricing adjustments in seed and A? Kind of, sort of, not really. But what I tell my LPs anyway is pricing is a lagging indicator, right? Just like the final score of a game is a lagging indicator that tells you who won the game, right? Time to do due diligence, time to make investment decisions, that's a leading indicator, right? And maybe like when it's like, well, number of first downs people are making, yardage being net yardage, positive yardage being gained. Doesn't tell you, maybe you haven't scored yet, so it's not going to show up on the scoreboard, but like not always. And then like you said, like with Bills, if you turn over the ball 4 times in a game, it doesn't matter if you gain 345 yards. But aside from that, generally speaking, you hang on to the ball and you're making yardage, it's a leading indicator. If you're finding more time to make investment decisions, it's a leading indicator that things are swinging more towards the investor way, and eventually pricing will find its level.
So first of all, you now see why I felt I needed to bring in an expert on the football front. Second of all, your comment about reduced opportunity cost. Teresa, you did a Washington Post Live interview in January of this year, and you talked about people who would say, maybe I've been thinking about starting this company or joining this early stage startup, but I used to think it was too risky. I was safe in this job, but now, is it safe? Maybe I should go out and start something. And we saw the same thing in 2008 when you were raising that growth fund. 2008 is important because the quote I read aloud is from Josh Koppelman, who we mentioned earlier, and it is dated October 2009. And the thing I love about that quote is, if you look, because I pulled the Cambridge statistics for how venture as an asset class performed. If you had taken the advice and pulled out of the asset class, so if you invested in 2008 and were in a top decile fund, you returned 4.72. That's the threshold for top decile. So everyone in the top decile did better than 4.72 times your money. 2009, 5.9 times your money. 2010, 6.09. 2011, 6.34. 2012, almost 6. 2013, more than 7.5. And it continues. That's top decile. But even top quartile, they're all over 2, mostly over 2.5, and a little over 3 in that period of several years after. And that's a quarter of all funds. You don't want to invest in the median. And Teresa, I love your point about diligence being a leading, not lagging indicator. If you have the time to do diligence, you should. And we certainly did not have the assets. And I know Torin put a question in here about interest rate environment back in the 2002, 2003 period was different, and how do you feel about deploying into early stage? Well, one of the results of that, because I did this, we spent a bunch of time on this at First Close Partners, looking back at 25 years of performance stats in the industry. So if you invested in venture again in 2002, 2003, 4, 5, top decile for all of those vintages was, you were definitely making well over 4 times your cash, and top quartile was better than 2 or almost 2 times your cash in that 4-year period. Again, you don't want to be in the median. So it's hard to argue against deploying, and then that's when you build a brand. And when the tourists, I hate to call them tourists, but when the tourists, and I have to say this because Tucker Carlson, who apparently passionately hates President Trump, according to his texts, but not according to his on-air stuff. Tucker Carlson last night described the January 6th deadly insurrectionist rioters who breached federal property as mere tourists. So when the tourists left the market in that 02, 05 period, or after the decline in 08, that was an amazing time to build a brand as a venture fund. It was an amazing time to build a startup because some of those costs of entry were reduced and it was less hot, sexy, exciting to be in that marketplace. Are we there again? Is this how best as a young venture fund, how best to, and I don't mean the age of the founders, I mean the founding of it being new, how best to capitalize on the opportunity that this adversity is presenting?
Yeah, Ed, I appreciate you saying, I've seen some comments in the chat around age and young. I think what we're trying to say is it's not age. It's just at the beginning of a company, at the beginning of a fund, young, but not by age in any means. Have a lot of respect for the serial entrepreneurs and would love to back those individuals because they've shown they can win. So, but for a young manager in this environment, thinking about how to navigate the waters, there's obviously, I think there's three things that you're trying to optimize and probably wrestling with. One, it's the LP community. How are you thinking about raising? And maybe you've raised, or maybe you're currently raising, and maybe you're trying to think about what fund 2, 3, and 4 are looking like. And so what work are you doing to establish best practices in a successful fundraise and creating an environment where you have really strong connectivity with your LPs? And there's never been a more important time than I think to try to communicate openly and honestly and understand the environment that you're in. You're going to probably hear a number of LPs say, give us 2 months, give us 3 months. They are not going to be as aggressive. They're working with their own portfolio issues. They're working with their own challenges in their decision making. So be patient with them, but do not. I would say out of sight, out of mind will work against you in this situation. Being able to stay on top of the radar and do that in an appropriate and effective way, I think is extremely important to be able to continue to maintain as you think about this fundraising, because you don't know when that opportunity is going to come where the light switch turns on and they decide to start deploying. So continue to maintain that. And then internally, what are you doing as a team? How are you navigating the environment out? I think Teresa makes some good points. I mean, really, some of the things is to slow down and think about your process and how you're attacking and how the decision tree that you're going through in terms of how you're getting to yeses or no. Given the environment that you have more time to think, the more time to ponder on how to best perform, take advantage of that. As a young manager, in the last 2-3 years, any manager, I mean, we were running on a treadmill on 10 at 10 incline. I mean, and you didn't have a lot of free time. Now that you do, I think this is an opportunity to reevaluate, reassess. Maybe there's an opportunity to even make hires. That's what we're doing. We're thinking about being aggressive. There's talented people out there. We're in the position that we can do that. And then third, obviously, is the externally in terms of the founders that you're going after. I mean, right now, again, it's maintaining discipline. I believe that in this industry, success leaves clues. There are individuals like Teresa and many other men and women that have a long history of being great pickers and are great investors and have done this in many different cycles. And one of the things that I think is consistent is they don't deviate from their models. They have discipline, and they have a thesis, and they spend the time and energy and effort to understand how to position themselves to be those pickers, and they stay relevant. And so I think one of the things that I've listened to a lot of managers over the last 3 years start to show a lack of discipline. They were specifically focused on a particular sector, and now they're generalists, or they were specifically focused on just being 1 or 2 partners, and now they have, a bunch of partners focused on a completely different area. And so and maybe they've even deviated from their areas of expertise. Maintaining and showing discipline and conviction in this environment, I think, is extremely important. And hopefully, you're working on feeling top of funnel by continuing to reinvest. I just am a believer in this, that the more that you give, the more that you provide, the more that you show up, whether that's your writing or networking or dinners or what are you adding, the more will come back to you in this industry. And so the more that you give to others, the more that you support other like-minded founders and find ways to show up for them, the net benefit of that is tremendous. And the compounding of that effect over a period of time is insurmountable, and it's just very rewarding. So continue to reinvest your time, energy, and effort into the ecosystem, into the community. And I think that a young manager will reap benefits for that long into the future.
I agree with everything that Ryan said. I'm going to double click on one thing, and then I'm going to go back to a question that Ed posed a couple questions ago, which is related to this that I don't think I fully answered. So the thing to double click on is just like Ryan and I were talking about, for us making our investment decisions, we have more time to do our diligence and to make those investment decisions. Realize that if you are fundraising right now, that flows uphill too, right? So our LPs have much more time and likely are asking for more diligence, more things, just as we are of our companies, right? Because it's part of the process. And then tying back to a question, so Ed, you had said something about the 50% drop, and then it was also like, well, smaller funds tend to do better. And then, if we think about like first close and emerging managers, particularly underrepresented managers. So here's the thing, right? So statistically speaking, we emerging and underrepresented managers typically raise smaller funds. Since we've spoken to some and backed them, and Ryan has, that's not necessarily because that was like the strategy, it's the what are the asset allocators willing to give them. So I would actually say now is a time when perhaps, putting the optimistic hat on, like, I would bet that people who are used to thinking about having less capital to invest in companies in this environment right now are likely to do better because they have always lived in a more capital scarce environment. And I'm going to use that same analogy. Like, why do I think that? We look at our portfolio companies, right? And we all know, right? Like, we love us all, our CEOs and founders, right? But we know who the ones are that are more, they're obviously, they have big visions, they're willing to go for it, but they're more moderated in like how quickly they're spending money. Like, it doesn't matter if they raise a $5 million round or a $50 million round, like, they still have a very thoughtful process about, how quickly and how I'm going to invest that. And here again, there is data because there's just a lot larger N in sample size, right? I'm sure first round has published some of this data. PitchBook, I think of, like, so again, and I know the same is true for other groups, but since it's International Women's Day and I happen to have the numbers, right? So women founded or co-founded venture-backed startups, people talk about like, oh, they get like 18, 19, 20% of the companies. Yeah, well, they've always gotten less than 2% of the venture capital dollars. And I know, unfortunately, I believe for Black founded startup, it's like 0.2 something. So tiny percents, right? There's challenges with that. I don't like it. I'm not happy with it. But what did the data show? Data shows that actually women-led venture-backed companies were more capital efficient in reaching exit, whether that was an exit through M&A or an IPO, like Jen Tejada from PagerDuty, right? And so what does that tell me? That tells me that, hey, right now, when capital is scarce, it feels slightly different to them, but this is kind of the way that they've always had to operate, because that's been the reality. It's like they were getting like $2 for every 98 bucks other people were getting from venture capitalists. So even if the venture funding is down, 40, 50, whatever it is, quarter on quarter. My history tells me that these are the people who are going to figure it out. And I've had and this wasn't about gender, because unfortunately we shouldn't even have enough diversity in our corporate, but I saw who were the people who figured it out in 2000, 2001, 2002, 2003. Also, who were the founding teams that figured it out in late 2008 through 2009, when it went from capital is available and free and forget about interest rates. I agree with the person who wrote it. Interest rates, a totally different environment right now. I didn't take enough macro. I don't know how to think about it. I just think about unit economics. So the size of the opportunity and the unit, so here the unit economics, someone who has learned to get by with less money for the same vision and goal, same market, trying to build the same products and compete with other people who have more money. I think that person is going to do a better job operating their company in this very capital constrained environment than the average person who's used to having like 3 or 5 times more money. Some of those other people will also figure it out because that's just who they are, right? I'm not even going to mention who one of my founders, but Ed probably can guess, is like, this person is like, I knew that he was going to be capital efficient when, after he raised the Series A from us back in my Excel days, and this was his second successful company. So he was probably a billionaire personally, but he gave me 2 slides on an analysis about why he should take $10,000 more to buy a color printer than a black and white printer, because it would actually save them so much money on like their presentation costs, because they're getting ready to go pitch customers. Again, I'm dating myself with the times, right? Nobody prints anything out anymore, but trust me, this was true back then. And I was like, okay, no matter what the environment is, this is a guy, this is a founder who literally thinks about every dollar as like not just his money, but like this is money like for everyone in my company and my investors' money. Sorry for the long answer, but I think that we have plenty of company examples that are my data points to draw my analogy for why I think underrepresented and undercapitalized fund managers are going to do better. And that's why I think first close partners companies, next play partner funds in that side of the business are going to do better than the average. And we've talked about the average is not good enough. I think there's going to be a high percentage that are going to be top quartile performers.
Teresa, you touched on something, a philosophy that I believe in, especially as it pertains to founders in any environment, really since the history of company making. He who can be faithful with a little can be faithful with a lot. And so I really do believe that. And when you see it, when you show up like the example you gave for that founder, the idea, the attention to detail, the understanding of the intricacies of their business down to the saving money. Let me just buy this copy machine because it's going to save us this money. Is it's impressive when you find those individuals.
Well said. You're like, I know this is being recorded. I'm gonna like write that. You're like so much more pithy than I am. I got to learn from you, man.
So Shante, who was in the military, talked about in the comments, training in the rain makes playing in the sun easy. In the military, we ran with weights in our bags to make it easier to run during physical testing. And just to underscore, a point Teresa made, I joined the board of the nonprofit arm, which is also the research arm of Black Women Talk Tech in 2019. And a couple of years ago, we released a report, or they released a report that talked about the new face of the founder, and it was data from more than 600 Black female founders, and something like 96% of them had other jobs. And today, you can still invest in I think we're still in the 50s in terms of the number of Black women who have raised $1 million or more in venture capital in America, which is crazy. So if you want to talk about a category of the venture asset class where people know how to do so much with so little, it is an amazing time for founders who know how to be scrappy and who over the last couple of years did not fall into a sense of entitlement that the next round of venture financing was their birthright. So I think that's it's certainly an important part of our thesis. I want to close with a couple of quick things. And Ryan, Teresa, if there are closing thoughts that you want to share, feel free to ready them. Teresa, I appreciated your stats on the number of devices because your former colleague and current friend, Camille, said that your recall of stats, and he was telling me recently that he referenced a company, and like 20 something years earlier, you had been involved in a case study at Bain on them, and you knew the stats off the top of your head. So your memory is extraordinary, especially, but not only for math. But Matthew, your partner, asked me to ask you where you think you might be ranked in wordscapes.
All right. Well, he is, so it's maybe in the top 100.
In the what?
Well, I don't know if it's the world or the US, but so it's the thing that I like to do. So it actually briefly just goes back to, so I used to have Red Zone a few years ago when my kids sort of stopped watching football with me. I was like, gave it up. And so now if I'm actually watching like a Bills game, like there's, Ryan, you got to feel me on this, right? Like there's so many stoppages of plays. Like I'm not even talking about commercials, right? But like to your point, in the huddle, right? So I will say I am good enough. I can complete a wordscapes. I can complete 2 to 3 wordscapes roughly in the time that it takes most teams to do their huddle before they have to be there without a delay of game penalty.
Wow. That's impressive.
The processing speed of the brains on the investment committee meetings for first close partners is a little blinding, Ryan. Betsy and I marvel at it. So appreciate that. Matthew thinks you might be number 1 in the world, by the way. And I think like whether it's number 1 or number 50, it is a world-class thing. And Ryan, just so that you don't think I only reached out to people I have in common with Teresa, I did ask your colleague, a couple of your colleagues, questions, some of which I've already worked in, but Hillary Cook said that you never talk about your Super Bowl stuff. So I wanted to go out of my way to ask about it. I'm really glad that you brought it up today. And she talked about some of the adversity that you overcame. But if you could talk a little bit about, you've created an incredibly unique network of some top VCs, athletes, LPs, and founders, and you've maintained relationships beyond this circle with a level of authenticity. You are kind of quiet. You do not seek the spotlight. How do you do this? What is your secret sauce? And you can blame Hillary for the question.
I will. She's around the corner, so I'll go visit her after this. But it probably is rooted back to, honestly, probably my mom in a lot of ways. One of the ways that she would try to motivate me as a young boy that was probably pretty confident, maybe a little cocky. She would always tell me that there's always somebody bigger, faster, stronger than you, no matter what. And that it was something that I kind of had to constantly prove. And so that I shouldn't, toot my own horn. I'll never forget, I'm in the 6th grade, and the elementary school that I went to, 6th grade was the highest grade at that elementary school. So you were the big man on campus. I came home one day from school, and my mom, like most parents, hey, well, how was school? School was great. Class was okay, but kickball was amazing, Mom. Kickball, we dominated. I kicked the ball over everybody's head. We won the game. I got everybody out. I'm bragging about myself. She said, oh, that's interesting. My mom goes, tell me, like, how do these teams get picked? And I go, well, I'm the best. So I'm the captain. And then there's somebody else that's a captain. And then we select the teams. And she goes, oh, that's interesting. She's like, then you kind of go through and everybody gets selected. And I'm like, well, not everybody, there's kids that, aren't good that don't get selected. And she said, oh, well, you know what? If you're as good as you say you are, why don't you pick the kid that never gets picked first and win with them? And then you're probably pretty good in that sense. And I'm like, oh, Jedi mind trick. I didn't know it was coming. So the next day I took the challenge and I saw the opportunity to do that. And I'll never forget that kid's expression and the joy that that young man had when I selected him. And it was a light bulb that went off that made me aware of others. And it made me aware that, to be able to open up my aperture, that it's not about me, that life is more about those that are around you, and our ability to serve those and meet the needs of others is far more rewarding than any glory that I get for oneself. And I think about Walter Payton's quote as good people talk about themselves, great people have others talk about them. And so I get very uncomfortable talking about myself or talking about Super Bowl or accomplishments. But I'm very comfortable talking about the success of others like you and Teresa and others, because that's where I get my joy from. So I appreciate that. But I didn't really answer your question other than try to avoid it.
Well, I will say your mom, and I agree with Faye in the comments, your mom sounds amazing. I will also note that the last call you and I had, you came late because you were talking to your grandma. And I wish that I had the opportunity to talk to my grandma with whom I grew up and with whom I was very close. And so, Teresa, we'll end with you on this. You have been through a number of cycles. Has what you're looking for in a founder changed? And what are one or two things maybe that might have changed because you've been through so many stages in the venture world?
So I'm gonna try to model after Ryan and be succinct enough that he can have time to add in. But I'm gonna start with referring back to something he said. I think that for me, especially at the early stage, investing in the founding teams. So sometimes it's a solo founder. Usually that's, in my experience, when that's worked, is usually because it's like a repeat founder, right? So it's like, well, first time they had, okay. But generally it's founding teams, and it's the team being like, that's what I've learned over time is like, for me anyway, and everyone has their own style, and people say like, do you invest in markets? Do you invest in teams? Do you invest in, technology or competitive advantage? Like, of course, everyone says all of the above, but like for me at that stage, it's the team. It's the team, it's the team, it's the team. Because the markets are going to develop or not, they're going to have to change and pivot, and you're backing the team that's going to figure that out. So that was always my instinct, but it didn't feel, it felt like early in my career, it felt better to be like, well, it's all about the technology and we have to do the technical due diligence. And if so I learned, I guess if I learned anything after these cycles, is learning to trust your gut. And like, for sure, you learn a lot about what's good and bad. In like 2000, and it was for me, it felt longer, but it was like 3 years, 2000, March 2000 through sometime maybe to the end of 2003. Man, that was a long time. Nothing was working. Everything looked bad. And you learned that like, actually the things where you were like, you had this worry, like it seemed like FOMO, everyone was looking at it before it was called FOMO. It just seemed like the hot deal. And you're like, man, but that was a mistake. So learn it, whatever your style is. I'm not saying, I'm just being transparent in mine. You choose your own style, learn to trust your gut. people want to make this business about like, yes, you have to love technology, be smart, research, learn new things, talk to the right people, have the right people in your huddle. But at the end of the day, we're backing people. And I don't know that there's any thing that is a better judge of people than other people. And all you got is whatever is true to you, right? What Ryan's gut tells him is going to be different than mine, but that's also why we have partners. So anyway, I guess that's the only thing. And then the other stuff is like, there's macros, you know, which is like, it's going to be hard for a while, I think. But I think, you know, different saying, pressure makes diamonds, right? It's just carbon, but pressure makes diamonds.
And to close, first, I want to thank Ryan and Teresa, two people I really admire and respect so much. And I appreciate the impact that you've had and how you extend the ladder behind you. Teresa, I know that you have quietly given actually tens of millions of dollars of money that you did not start out with to numerous nonprofits. You do it very quietly, so I know that you're going to be angry with me. This is why I'm doing this at the end, for talking about this now. And I know that you have also protested and said there will never be a building with my name on it. I hope that there will be, even though you will go kicking and screaming if someone does that. But venture would be a different and better place, and a more lucrative place even, if there were more folks like the two of you. So super appreciative of having you here with us. Want to encourage folks to also sign up for my partner Meredith and Joanna Stone from Oakland doing M&A for female founders. It should be a great session. They're doing a whole bunch of these sessions, venture for female investors, and the response so far has been great. So thank you all. We will see you again soon, and keep playing, but don't play Teresa in words. Take care.
Don't try to beat Ryan in any athletic endeavor, including car racing.
Thank you, everyone. It's all about your next play.
Thanks.